Hi, everyone, and welcome to our presentation for the Making Conservation a Way of Life, Reporting and Data. I'm Karina, Karina Herrera, supervisor for our conservation team. So let's go on to the next slide. So meeting goals for today, it's to first off give you a brief overview of the timeline of the Making Conservation a Way of Life regulation, give you more context on who needs to report and what exactly is being reported. We'll then move to a live walkthrough of the reporting form and close it off with any questions about the reporting form. For any general questions about the regulation, we will also provide an email at the end of this presentation so you guys can contact us with any of those questions. And then I will now hand it off to our research data specialist, Dr. Mariel Rodero, to walk you through the presentation and the demo.
Thank you, Karina. So I'd like to start off with a brief recap of all that's happened in the past few months. So first off, the regulation was adopted by the board on July 3rd of this year and sent to the Office of Administrative Law in August. It was approved. So the regulation will take effect on January 1st of 2025. We had a limited pilot in September of 2024 and updated the draft form that we presented at CalWEP based on that feedback. The reporting form is now on the WUI data portal, and a lot of relevant data is also up online on the open data portal. Throughout October to December, we will be updating those data tables to reflect changes that have been made by suppliers. And then on January 1st of 2025, that report is also due. So the regulation's been approved. The regulatory text is online, and I've provided a few different options for um, how to read the reg text. So the first link is the full website for not just the regulatory text, but also some fact sheets and other materials. If you want to just look at the reg text, that's that second link. And then finally, it's also up on Westlaw at that third link. Thought it would be useful to provide a brief reminder of who the regulation applies to. It applies to urban retail water suppliers who are defined in water code as providing an annual average total of 3,000 acre-feet of water for municipal purposes and/or serving an annual average of 3,000 or more municipal service connections. Now, not all water suppliers are included in the regulation, so wholesalers who only provide wholesale water are excluded. Water agencies that are under both of those thresholds above, those are excluded from the regulation. And also water suppliers who provide water solely for agricultural water use are excluded. It's also important to note that households and individual businesses are not subject to the regulation. While they will be impacted due to actions that suppliers may take, they are not held to the individual standards defined. Part of the regulation, because this is a very data heavy regulation, we take data streamlining very seriously and have been making efforts to eliminate redundant data submission by identifying existing reports or existing sources and putting that data up online. So we've essentially taken all of that data, put it on the open data portal as mentioned before, and we will be further simplifying reporting for this regulation by enabling the reporting form to be pre-filled with required data that's already been reported elsewhere. This figure summarizes some of the data sets that have been identified as good candidates for facilitating that data streamlining process. So for example, the Safer Clearinghouse is going to provide a lot of that actual water use data, so potable and non-potable demand, supply, and source production. We also pre-fill things like the data provided by DWR for landscape area, annual and seasonal climate data, crop coefficients, as well as population from SIDWIS and data from the validated water loss audits. All of that data can be found at the URL at the top of the page. I believe there are up to 12 tables now on the open data portal. It includes population, landscape area, all of those fields that were summarized in the prior slide, as well as a crosswalk that establishes the connection between suppliers as identified by the department and public water systems as identified by the board. The data streamlining process can be pretty much succinctly summed up this way. We identify that data, and if necessary, we clean it up and reshape it so that it's compatible with both the open data portal and the reporting form. We put that data online with data dictionaries and descriptions of the data set, as well as contact information for the appropriate parties for finding out more about the data set, and then using the Open Data Portal API to then take that data that's online and load it into the reporting form. With the API, it enables us to maintain a connection to those online tables so that a new reporting form does not have to be downloaded every time the tables are updated. The user can simply refresh it within the reporting form itself. So how does the reporting form work? It is one template for all suppliers. And the way that individual reports are generated for each supplier is the supplier selects the name of their agency, and then we use information in that either from the supplier ID or the public water system IDs as established in the crosswalk that I mentioned earlier. And then we use the IDs to subset information from all of the data sets that we identified, and then aggregate it and pre-fill the appropriate fields in the report. Moving on to how to complete and submit the report. So the reporting package is a zip file that is located on the WUI data portal. If you have been involved with submitting urban water management plans or the validated water loss audits, you should hopefully be at least a little bit familiar with the WUI data portal. So the package can be found under the Urban Water Management Plan Resources section in the public view of the portal. The zip file will be the very first link in that resources page. The exact name of the file might be a little bit different. I believe we're up to 2.1 by now, but it should be the first link on that page. Within the zip file, you'll find a number of files and folders. So first off, there are two versions of the reporting form. They're both Excel workbooks, but there are versions with and without VBA, and either one will be accepted for submission. It's just that the VBA version adds some nice little features like automatic hide reveal based on values that are entered in the workbook. It's just that some agencies, the security settings will disable that VBA, so we offer both just in case. There's also a certification statement that must be submitted along with the form. And that certification statement is essentially saying that the data within the form has been reviewed and that the information provided is true and accurate. we request that you submit the certification.pdf document. That one has the digital signature feature. Unless you're having issues with configuring your digital signature, then otherwise just submit that other one that has just a couple of fields to fill in. There's also a guidance document that will explain in greater detail how to fill out each tab within the form, and a sort of quick summary guide of that explains the contents of the zip file. To correct data that is up on the Open Data Portal, corrections need to be done in the source data sets. That means that if you need to, for example, update your population, that would be in SWRCB. If you need to update what real water loss values, that would be in the water loss audits. Some of that data that's coming from the clearinghouse, and that's pretty easy to edit. You just go and you directly edit in the clearinghouse, and it'll show up pretty soon in the backend server. Whereas other data sets, those changes might take longer because it'll require reaching out to the appropriate team at the board or the department and then getting them to accept and validate that information. I will be updating the open data tables more or less on a bi-weekly basis until mid-December, so please don't wait until the last minute because those changes may take time. Alternative data may be provided for residential landscape area effective precipitation and evapotranspiration. The data must be demonstrated to the department in coordination with the board to be as good as or better than the data provided by the department. To submit that alternative data for consideration, contact WUI standards at water.ca.gov. And as noted in the previous slide, approval may take some time. So if you're planning to submit alternative data, please do it soon. For the report that is due on January 1st of 2025, suppliers may report variance and provision data that has not been reviewed and approved by board staff. If you are interested in doing so, resources for some of the variance methodologies can be found in the guidance document section 2.10. The department and the board will be working on variance applications for subsequent reporting years. Once those applications have been developed, they will be due by October 1st of each year, but then the variance will, once approved, will be valid for up to 5 years. Just a quick summary of what needs to be done prior to submission. So first, within the reporting form, please refresh the data tables to make sure that the data that's pre-filled is the most up-to-date version of that data. If for whatever reason you're unable to do a refresh, firewall settings or whatever, just please spot check the data that is in the form, compare it to what's on open data. Make sure that all of the required fields, which are green and orange, are completed in all relevant tabs. And what I mean by that is, at the bare minimum, make sure that all of the objective and BMP sections are filled out. If you're not planning to complete the bonus incentive or the variances, you don't need to fill out those, but everything else, all relevant data should be filled out. Also, make sure that the certification statement is completed and signed and uploaded to the WUI data portal as well as the reporting form. So the report is due by January 1st of 2025. If you need to resubmit for any reason, you may do so until that January 1st deadline. Now, in order to submit the report, supplier must have one or more verified user accounts on the WUI data portal, and that can also take a little bit of time. So if you don't have anyone with the current account, please reach out to DWR. The minimum requirements for submission are submitting the reporting form and that signed certification statement. And then if you are planning to use alternative data, or if you are a supplier with 10% or less of CII deliveries relative to total deliveries, you would upload that documentation along with other required files. So the submission page is also located on the WU data portal, but that is hidden behind the login. So um, again, make sure you have that user account. So after you log into the WU data portal, you would scroll down to the Urban Water Use Objective Reporting tool and click on that button to um, see the list of agencies that are associated with the account. You would launch the Urban Water Use Objective tool for that agency and select 2024 for the reporting year and then click continue. And then this is what the submission page looks like. So for each file, the process will be something like this. First, you'll enter a file description that is required. Otherwise, your submission won't be accepted. In this case, for the reporting form, I just said, it was the reporting form for test agency. One is the description. You'd select the document type, reporting form for the reporting form, and then other for the certification statement. Upload the file, and then once all of your files are submitted, you would click that final Submit Urban Water Use Objective button. A confirmation email will be sent to the email address that is associated with the account. Now you can remove files if you make a mistake. You just click that little red circle that's to the right of each of the files. Do note that the regardless of the file name that for the reporting form that you submit, it will be renamed once you upload it. And that's just because I don't want to have, 400 files with the same file name. It just makes it my life easier. All right. And with that, I'm going to exit out of the presentation for a moment and pull up the reporting form. So as I mentioned, there are two versions of the reporting form. This is the version that contains VBA, but if you are using the one without, it'll just essentially, instead of having rows that are hidden and unhidden, things will be just blanked out. So as you can see, by default, there's no supplier selected, which means that there's a bunch of zeros and error values. Once you select that supplier, I'm just going to choose the first one on the list, then it changes. We have that org ID that's associated with the supplier, the number of public water systems, and then you'd fill out your contact information here. And then you can see that once the supplier has been selected, a bunch of data has already been pre-populated in the form. Down below, you'll see the list of public water systems that are associated with the supplier, in this case, one water system. But there may be other cases where there's more than one. So just review this information, make sure that you have a full 12 months worth of non-zero potable deliveries in the clearinghouse. Make sure that the order of magnitude of deliveries seems reasonable, and then proceed with the rest of the report. I'm going to skip ahead to the residential indoor budget because this is one of the easier ones to show on a single screen. So the budget for the the residential indoor budget, it's a pretty simple calculation. You need essentially two things. You need the residential water use standard, which in this case is 55 GPCD, and the residential service area population, which was obtained from SWRCB. Multiply those two numbers in 366 because it's a leap year to get the total residential indoor water use budget. Now, notice that there are different colors for these various cells. If you ever get confused by what those colors mean, you can go to this abbreviations and color key tab here, which will summarize for you what all of these colors mean. As you can see, the colors that are on the blue-gray scale, those are not editable fields. So the blue-gray color signifies something that is pre-filled or just a hard-coded value. Blue is a parameter that is defined in statute or regulation. A gray is a calculated subtotal, and then the dark gray with the white text is a budget total. Now, there are three kinds of editable fields throughout the form. Orange and green, those are mandatory. However, mandatory if you are choosing to utilize that particular part of the budget. So, for example, as I mentioned before, bonus incentive and variances, they're only mandatory if you are planning to utilize those values. There are also gold cells, those are optional. And you can also see here, there's a version summary of all the changes that have been made to the reporting form if you are interested in that. We're going to move on now to the residential outdoor budget. And here you can see there's a lot more stuff going on here. If you are choosing to utilize any of the variances, you would just change this to yes. In this case, in the VBA version, it hides and unhides those rows, but in the not VBA version, the tables would still be present. You would just ignore those values. But as you can see, they're unhidden here, whereas everything else is hidden. So going back up, there are three different components to the residential outdoor budget. There's just your basic budget. There's the new construction, and there the special landscape areas. Here we can see that the weather data from DWR has been pre-filled here, and then the base equation has been calculated using irrigable irrigated area. And then there are other values that can be filled in. So for example, new construction, SLAs, and then if desired, the budgets. Now, the residential agriculture one is kind of a funny one because you can choose to either designate it as a special landscape area, in which case you would not have to complete the variance application in future years, or if you want to have that greater total, then you would switch to either the 5% threshold equation or the 1% threshold equation. Moving on to the real water loss budget. Until the report that's due on January 1st, 2029, which covers the 2027-2028 fiscal year, the water loss budget can be either a budget calculated using the water loss standards or reported real water loss. You can see here that the number of service connections and the length of mains are filled in here. If these seem out of date, then there is an option to go and update those values. Just make sure if you are going to do so that you switch it to the water loss audit values due Jan 1, 2025. In the actual water use tab, you can see that everything is already filled in. So just check those values. If you have more than one water system associated with your supplier, then those individual water system values will be aggregated. And there are links to the various tables on open data. Oh, one thing I completely forgot. We do have references to the various parts of the reg text that define each of these values. So if you feel like you need to go back into the reg text and get a deeper definition than what is provided here, All of those references are located here. And then the one that's sort of a thorn in my side, real water loss. So we tried our best with the data streamlining to gather all of the information that sort of will make the filling out the report easier. However, water loss is a tricky one, first because sometimes there's a misalignment with fiscal and calendar year, and also there's just a little bit of a lag in terms of the reporting. So as you can see here, in this case, the real loss data here corresponds to the 2022 calendar year. Now, if the water loss is supposed to reflect the conditions of the fiscal year 2023 to 2024 in this case. If you have pretty consistent water loss and you believe that this value that is pre-filled here reflects accurately the real loss of this reporting period, you can leave this as is and you would go with those open data values. However, if you believe that you can provide a better estimate, you can select own estimate, you fill in those loss values with whatever method you feel is appropriate, whether it be maybe a multi-year average or a per service connection value that you then multiply by the number of service connections to get a volume. Just fill those values in and describe the method that you used in this box down below. Moving on to from the objective to best management practices. Now, one important point to bring up, there is a deadline to classify existing CII water users by June 30th of 2027. However, there is still a requirement to report on progress for this report, even if that progress is 0. That means that for each of these categories, you would fill in the number of water users that have been classified in the various categories, banking, education, etc. If you have not classified any water users up to this point, you would just go ahead and fill in 0 for this whole table. For DIMS and in lieu technology, similar deal. If you have not yet identified any landscapes, you'd fill in 0. Otherwise, fill out the table depending on the chosen method. And then go down below and provide information on in lieu technology and best management practices. For the best management practices section 974 tab, there's this first part for 974A and B, and then a number of options based on which method you choose for the high water users best management practices section. There's 6 tabs here. You only have to fill out one of them. So depending on if CII water use is 10% or less of total deliveries, you would, just choose your method and fill out the next tab accordingly. So for example, here we see go to the 974C1 tab. If deliveries were 9% of total, then you would go to the 974C1 10% or less tab. We had some technical difficulties, but we are back. And I'd like to talk about section 974C1. So note that suppliers are supposed to identify CI water users that exceed these specified thresholds by June 30th of 2025. However, we still request that progress be reported. So the number of water users identified at or above the 97.5th percentile for CII water use and 80th percentile for CII water use, and then the corresponding estimated water savings associated with the BMPs offered to those water users. So, if you haven't identified anybody yet, please just put 0, but otherwise, anybody that has been identified, give us the number of users. And then below that, you would provide the BMPs. If you were going to go with one of the more complicated versions, so for example, 974C2, which has that same requirement for the 97.5th percentile of CII water use, but then for the 80th percentile breaks it down into the various classification subcategories. It has a longer deadline, but we still do ask that you report on progress, as I noted before. Okay, I am going to stop here, go back to the webinar, but if you have any further questions that were not covered in this very brief overview, please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information will be at the end of the slideshow. Okay. Once the reports have been submitted on January 1st, staff will be going through reviewing those reports, pulling data from the reports, and then putting that aggregated data also up on Open Data Portal. Once the next fiscal year begins, we will be compiling the relevant data for the next, for the next fiscal year, i.e. the 2024-2025 fiscal year, posting that data on Open Data Portal as we did this year, and then repeating the process. If you are not yet signed up for our supplier email list, please contact us at orpp-waterconservation@waterboards.ca.gov. If you are signed up already, please check that our emails are reaching your inbox. We have sent a few at this point, and if you haven't received any of them, please check your spam folder. We will be in person at the 2024 CalWEP Winter Plenary at the CNRA building in Sacramento. That's on December 12th, so come say hi. For further questions, if you have specific questions about the reporting form, my email is here. If you have more general questions about the regulation, or I'm out of office for any reason, contact that waterconservation@waterboards.ca.gov. It is the same as ORPP-water conservation. They're just aliases of each other. Otherwise, thank you.